Hello again, and here we are with part 2 of my look at Aika Village. Now, as a quick recap, the first video we looked at the first two houses and a couple of things we see along the way. I'm going to continue going through the remaining two houses and a couple of other things again along the way to those houses to progress the story and analyze everything I can see. Also, through looking around and through a little bit of research, there's one aspect of Aika Village which has never really been talked about. I don't think anyone has even touched on this aspect of the story. So I'll be revealing that towards the end of this video, and potentially this could add a whole new twist to the story of Aika Village. Without any further ado, let's get started. Alright, and as promised, here is the dream address for Aika Village for any of you who want to go and take a look and see what all the hype is about, so to speak. Right, now that I've done that, let's begin from where we left off. And here we are, right back where we left off. Okay, so now we've got the shovel from Lloyd and we are moving onward to the next area. Just one thing I may or may not have mentioned in the last video before we move on, and that is, you may notice this house looks completely different to the first one to the north, which kind of suggests that it's not meant to be looked at as a physical continuation of the original home, but rather it serves to advance the story symbolically through the layout of the rooms, and it introduces the elements of the conflict, and it also serves to foreshadow the events to come. Now, as we move west towards the home in the southwest, we're going to be passing through a field full of bamboo sprouts and spoiled turnips. Now, you're probably wondering why there are so many sprouts and spoiled turnips. Well, let's start with the bamboo. Now, bamboo is symbolic of many good things, including longevity, luck, health, wealth, and peace and harmony in the home. The fact that they are struggling to grow may imply that the family's good fortune is running out, and that trouble is beginning to surface and is brewing in the home. The spoiled turnips, on the other hand, could represent economic hardship, or it could also represent starvation. In this area of town, we also see dead trees, along with the familiar statue fountains we saw earlier around the plaza. The town itself seems to mirror what's going on inside Aika's home, and we see lots of visual signs of deterioration. This is another sign that time is passing as we're moving between the homes. And here we are at the third house. Now, as you can see, the third house is run down, which is keeping with the deteriorating condition of this part of the town. And from a further extent, symbolically, it does represent the family's relationship as well. One person or user has noted that it seemed to represent the dollhouse, that both houses have a pink roof. So there's one similarity, or just something to keep in mind. It's also worth mentioning at this point that there is a bubble wand just outside the house in a bag. Now, I know you can't see it in my screenshot, but I already picked it up at this point, just out of curiosity. Now, I have absolutely no clue what this means. If anything, it could suggest that Aika is still a kid at heart. The item is light-hearted, innocent. But if you think things will turn out alright, all I can say to you watching is don't get your hopes up, because it's about to get even darker as we proceed. As we enter the third house, what we see is a kind of labyrinth filled with high bookshelves. Now, As you can see from the screenshot, when you first enter, you will have a couple of staircases going up and down, but straight in front of you will be the doll with the axe. Similar scenery to what we saw in the last house with all the dolls sat around the table. Now, if you are unfortunate enough to meet Aika inside this house, it will make navigating a major problem. Now, you'll find that the first two characters in her name, where if you talk to her, are now small, and she's saying something like, I love my mummy. Really distorted, this time mixing up hiragana, katakana, and English letters, and repeating the first part of the phrase, I love. This is a clear example of Aika's worsening mental state. Now, some people may take this as evidence that the doll is taking over more aggressively at this point. Now, personally, I think this main room is, in a way, a work of genius, and I don't think it could ever be surpassed in its ability to both annoy and terrify at the same time. Basically, it's a bookcase maze limiting your line of sight. In one corner we have a theremin which will wail according to how close you move to it. Now, in the screenshot I've got up at the moment, you can clearly see a water bird that creaks as it rocks. The sounds these two create clash, and they make a terrifying feeling that creates some unease and dread, as well as panic and confusion. Now, Easter eggs line the floors, and you can imagine yourself in this situation, rounding a corner and becoming face to face with a doll, axe in hand, which also steps on an eggshell. The cracking, the pain even if you're barefoot in the dream world, as I imagine so. I think this room really kind of helps us understand how Aika is feeling at this point in the story, being consumed and taken over by the doll. And if you don't subscribe that interpretation, sinking deeper into a mental illness, which will ultimately lead to insanity. In the back left corner of the room, which is the screenshot we've got up at the moment, is a picture of Aika and her mother. The father is missing, but it looks like the mother is now happy. One user has suggested that because of the lack of shoes, we can't really tell if it's Aika or the doll. This may be further proof that the doll is slowly consuming Aika while being unknown to her mother. We also have the 11th beehive next to the picture. Now, I believe this can represent the angry feelings that Aika has toward her mother. Of course, that's just my interpretation, but these seem to be unfounded in general. But the rest of the home may shed some more light on this. Now, this house features rooms that are much more vague than any of the ones we've seen so far, to the point they're almost surreal. And so it's basically up to you watching what they could mean. If you believe that the doll is taking over, the room you're seeing on screen now could symbolize Aika's mind and memories. They're slowly being ripped to shreds except from a few things she holds dear. Basically, the picture book may represent the memories of her perfect childhood back in the first home. The lucky clover on the left, however, may just be an allusion to death. If you think that the room with all the stationery wasn't weird enough, if you come out of there and go to the room on the other side, we now come across a rundown room with a piano and 8 eggs. This room is probably known as one of the most puzzling presented here, and there are many interpretations of the scenery. One popular theory is that the room is meant to represent the idea of playing the piano while tiptoeing around eggs, a virtually impossible feat that would require great skill. People are sure that Aika feels pressure from her mother to be the perfect child. If this is the case, Aika must have grown quite a bit to be able to play the piano, although the piano metaphor could very well be that, physically embodied. Others believe that the room is a symbol of Aika's unborn creativity or talents. The eggs are thought to represent this idea of something not coming to fruition. Some are going as far as to say that they could represent Aika's mother and her miscarriages, which would assume she's not the first child. As for the number of eggs, 8 is thought to be a lucky number in Japan, which in turn is associated with prosperity and holiness, which runs contrary to what is going on here. Whatever the meaning is of this room, it seems to resolve around the position of these seemingly unrelated objects. Okay, so that's that room. Let's head upstairs. As we go upstairs, we are greeted with the top floor plastered with images, mostly of Aika's mother, but also of the family and the dog. The most disturbing element, however, is the TV that's been left on. Now, if you made it up here within the hour, you'll see static. The same static from the pattern from when we came into Aika Village in the first place. And the doll is staring right into the static. Now, if we run with the theory that the static is representing some kind of gateway to another world, the doll is waiting for it to open and to go inside. One interesting thing I'd like to point out here is the slide puzzle on the green dresser. The image of the family is out of place until you press the A button and slide the puzzle back into place. This image of a fractured family is a good representation of their current state. The presence of so many images of Aika's mother, though, one has to wonder if it's a scene from real life or a visualization of life through Aika herself. Either way, this is a scary and creepy sight. And what room is this? Has the family moved on? Why is the table still set for 3? And is this what's left of Aika's memories of the first house? Maybe the last room in this house can provide us with a few more clues and introduce a few possible endings, or again some clues as to what happened next. Let's go and find out. As we enter the room, we are greeted with, I don't know how to really describe it on first glance, but honestly, I think this room is probably the most symbol-heavy we're ever going to come across in Aika Village. So let's start by addressing the most obvious thing, the bed. Some people believe that the black outline is to indicate that someone was murdered in the bed. Others have suggested it's a ghost. One theory I find to be interesting is the bed is supposed to be allude to the Japanese phenomenon of kokoshi, or lonely death. I don't know if I pronounced that right. In such a case, there's a person who doesn't have many social ties, they die alone at home, and they aren't discovered for weeks or even years later, and their bodies leave a black ring or halo due to the fluids that are released upon decomposition. If this was the site of Kodoshi, I think I pronounced it right this time, who died here? Was it Aika's mother? Or did Aika just leave her body in her bed, not knowing what to do? Other theories suggest that this is not the mother's final resting place, but Aika. The vintage telescope could really be interpreted as her mother's ever-watchful eyes. Again, we see the lovely doll in the case or on the fireplace, a reminder of what Aika's mother wishes for her daughter. Perhaps the walls around her is to imply that Aika's mother is so overprotective and she's kept her secluded and locked off from the rest of the world. You may also notice the cradle here, which the doll sleeps in, presumably, and whether this is a pretend sleep or real sleep is really unknown. The Rococo clock and the hourglass symbolize the passing of time, perhaps suggesting that this scene takes place in a future time, far from the perfect family we saw in House 1. The most powerful imagery, though, is in the back corner. We see a birdcage standing in front of a music stand. Many people personally believe that this is another symbol that Aika is being controlled by her mother, who wanted her to behave how she wanted, and that's represented by the bird who's forced to sing the notes on the music sheet, rather than singing whatever tune it pleases. On the floor of the room are letters and a typewriter, which suggests that the mother is maintaining some kind of correspondence. A couple of people might think from this that she's actually looking for a new husband or lover. This seems kind of unlikely because of the picture we saw earlier of her and Aika, and she was happy. Right, I think that pretty much wraps up house number 3. Right, we're in the home stretch, so let's get on to house number 4 and let's wrap up this video. And here we are, home sweet home. Now, up until this point, it seems like the perfect family has been broken apart. The father has left due to possible infidelity on behalf of the mother. Some have gone as far to say he left after discovering that Aika wasn't his child. There has been conflicting imagery suggesting Aika's undying love for her mother, as well as her mother's overbearing nature. Perhaps to Aika the pressure is real, but she still loves her mother and only wants her love and affection, like any normal child would. Perhaps her mother seeks these qualities in her daughter because she doesn't possess them herself. So, we are right back where it started. House 1 is back, but comparing it with before and after will show you just how much it's changed. Outside there are no flowers, only weeds, barren trees, rotten fruit. The house that was so full of love is now in a terrible state. Now, if you meet Aika here and you talk to her, her last words will need no translation. She's clearly no longer there. This could be that the doll has finally taken her over completely, or she's reverted to a non-verbal state after being left alone for so many years after her mother's death. Her name is normal, though, contrary to her disposition, however. Right, so that's the outside. Let's take a look at the interior of this final house. Right, when we enter the house, it doesn't look that it's fared any better from the outside. It's completely trashed, which suggests whoever was living there has been reduced to an almost animalistic state. Could Aika have lived in the house by herself after her mother died? The TV's back on, which could suggest that Aika's mind has now been erased and is now clouded by the thoughts of someone else, the doll in control. If you're wondering what's in the back room now that it's now accessible, but we'll come back to that after we have a quick look upstairs. The scene we are greeted with when we head up the stairs offers a very grim ending to the tale. The pictures of the mother, the dog, and even Aika herself have been scribbled out, and the doll is sitting by with the murder weapon in hand. The toys in the back also have seemed to have turned their backs to the gruesome scene. Now, if you'll notice the teddy bear, its clothes have been changed to customized red, which could imply a bloody end to the story. But still, the question remains, has Aika really died, or simply possessed by the doll? If that's the case, why is she crossed out? Well, there's nothing more I can really talk about in this room, so let's head downstairs and check out the final room. And, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, the final room. Now, the first thing you'll notice as you step in is it has the same pattern of TV static. And right in the middle of the room, we have Aika standing next to the doll. If anything, this room confirms that the instances of the doll in the other homes are meant to be the doll and not Aika. Right? This is actually the first time we see Aika and the doll together. The fact that they are caged may mean that the doll has now fully invaded Aika's mind and body. The doll is finally with Aika and can now be the object of her full attention and love. now that her mother is now out of the picture. Alternatively, the barriers may represent actual physical barriers. The fact that the pair seems to be watched may infer that Aika currently resides in some kind of mental institution, which IMO is right where she belongs. She's constantly watched by medical staff, which are represented by the mystic statues. Interestingly, though, the only real statues are the ones behind her. Perhaps this represents Aika's warped perception, and the doll has made her untrusting of other people. To a degree, she may even be paranoid. Right, and there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. All four houses and, well, the main story of Aika Village. I'm now just going to proceed to talk about a couple of little bits and pieces and the little twist I mentioned in the beginning. Now, if you did what I said earlier towards the end of the last video, and you picked up the wetsuit in front of house number 2, you should make your way down to the beach. Now, there's a ramp you go down to access the beach. Now, if you continue towards the opposite side, you may find some red shoes, which are a big problem for any of the theories that may suggest that Aika made it out alive. In Japan, people are known to remove their shoes prior to committing suicide. This may imply that Aika was ultimately led to suicide, either by her own volition, or she was enticed and persuaded by the malevolent force of the doll. If we head further north along the beach, you come across an area of dead bamboo shoots and 4 four-leaf clovers, a nice collection of death symbolism. Interestingly, that there are 4. Could this possibly mean that the doll passed on as well as Aika? Now, if you are wearing the wetsuit, you can swim across to the secluded part of the beach. Now, on the secluded section, there's a small grave site, which you may have seen if you went past Octavian's house near House 1. There's candy, chocolate cake, a lollipop, a few things that Aika seemed to like as a child. This might imply that this is Aika's grave, or the little gifts that are left by Aika herself at her mother's grave. This is not exactly clear. Behind the flowers, a doll is buried, and then if you use a shovel you can dig up a creepy skeleton, which is at the site. And there is one last thing in this area that is buried. The final thing that's buried here is a time capsule. In a way, this is like what they would do in a movie, where something is revealed in the last few moments, which would set it up as a sequel. The meaning behind the time capsule is not exactly clear, like a lot of the stuff we've seen here in Aika Village, but when you see it a different way, it may have a fitting end to the story. The contents of the time capsule may prove what happened in Aika Village, but honestly, I don't think we'll ever know. It seems like the creator of this town did everything here intentionally, with multiple meanings and multiple interpretations. Basically, it's one of those towns where you have to try and figure out what happened or come up with your own theories and interpretations about just what happened. After receiving pieces of information as well as visuals which suggest one thing or another. So this is a very multi-layered town. So my opinion of Aika Village, it's very well made. As I said just a moment ago, it is very multi-layered. There's a lot of different interpretations based on the pieces of information we are given as we progress round. There's also the visuals which really get you thinking. So overall, it's actually very well made, and I just wish that, well, there was an interview published in a Japanese magazine with the creator of Aika Village. Personally, I would love to read it if it was ever translated into English. Right, so that's all of that done. All that remains is the final part in which I kind of been holding back on since, like I said at the very beginning of this video. Okay, and here we are finally at the end. Before I go on to talk about the little twist I mentioned at the beginning, I have just one question for everyone watching. What has been a constant theme throughout Aika Village? You give up? It's time. The element of time. It plays a big role and is constantly referred to throughout Aika Village. And you're probably guessing what... Well, you could probably guess what I'm trying to get at, but okay, here we go. If you talk to various residents of Aika Village, you should get a dialogue similar to this. Hey, did you know that Aika, who lives here, I heard she's a real time traveler. And this is where my theory comes from. How I came up with my theory actually happened while I was playing Infamous. After having a look at Infamous Second Son, and this is where my theory begins. What if the malevolent force possessing the doll wasn't really a spirit at all? What if it was somehow related to Aika from another timeline? Let me see if I can explain. Okay, so in the alternate timeline, Aika has been under her mother's influence for so long, she's finally cracked and she's killed her in the future. Knowing that she could have changed her life a lot sooner, what if she went back in time to the present time in Aika Village, possessed her favourite toy as a child, the doll, and corrupts and influences her younger self to do the things that she could not. How I really thought about this is, like I said, while I was playing Infamous, and that kind of gave me the idea. Big spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't played Infamous, even though it has been out since 2009. Anyway, in Infamous, the main antagonist is Kessler, who is revealed at the end to be Cole's future self, who has gone back in time to make his past self the hero he couldn't be in his own time, to stop a conduit called the Beast, which basically destroys the world. He had the power to stop it, but he chose to run away and protect his family. So that's where my kind of inspiration comes from. Someone who has knowledge of future events decides to go back and change the past to benefit themselves. Now, really, that's all that really I can think of, considering the time travel aspect that is brought up with these little dialogues. And one last thing about Aika Village I didn't include earlier. If you talk to other residents, they are obviously aware of Aika, but they don't want to really talk about it or really acknowledge it. If you look at it one way, it's a bit similar to what they do in Silent Hill. It's more or less the same aspect. There's something supernatural or abnormal going on. Everyone is aware of it, but they don't want to be involved in it. And if you go to various houses where different residents are living, you do see dolls everywhere. So in a way, it's like the doll is watching everyone, and if someone steps out of line, that person is basically killed. Which would explain why the retail in Aika Village is permanently closed. Maybe the people who lived there didn't want to live as the doll intended, so they got killed, they disappeared, and that's why retail is permanently closed. In a way, it does make sense. Anyway, that's everything. Whew! I didn't expect the video to be broken up into two parts like this, but, you know, it's a lot to talk about. Anyway, just to wrap things up, I just want to thank everyone who watched the video, and well, if they watched it all the way through to the end, I really, really appreciate it. I really do. Right, thanks very much for watching, and until next time, later YouTube!